Hello and welcome. Right now, we're going to look through a slideshow. It says post-midterm clarifications, but really this is concept clarifications taking place somewhere just before, just after midterms. In this case, in this term, there was quite a bit of confusion after the quiz that took place in week 6. So I thought maybe we go ahead with these concept clarifications now. In our list, we have Cartesian skepticism, research and rough works, a priori versus a posteriori, with rationalism versus empiricism, and a perfect storm of confusion types of biases. Let's get started. RefWorks. This is simply a link to a lovely playlist produced by RefWorks, and two, we will be working through the research process together at some point in the future, but there we are. A priori versus a posteriori. A priori means knowledge before and apart from experience. A posteriori means knowledge after and from experience. A priori knowledge is associated with rationalism, while a posteriori knowledge is associated with empiricism. Rationalism is a philosophical approach that emphasizes the role of reason and intuition in acquiring knowledge. According to this approach, some knowledge can be gained through pure reason or intuition without relying on sensory experience. Rationalists believe that there are certain innate ideas or principles that are independent of sensory experience and can be discovered through reason and intuition alone. They argue that the human mind has the ability to grasp these ideas and principles through a process of deductive reasoning. This approach is often contrasted with empiricism, which emphasizes the importance of sensory experience in acquiring knowledge. Rationalists argue that some knowledge, such as mathematical and logical truths, some knowledge is not based on sensory experience, but instead innate and can be discovered through reason alone. Empiricism is a philosophical approach that emphasizes the importance of experience and observation in the acquisition of knowledge. According to this approach, all knowledge ultimately comes from sensory experience, and our understanding of the world is built up through observation, experimentation, and analysis of data. Empiricists believe that knowledge cannot be gained through pure reason or intuition alone, but must be based on observation and experience. This approach is often contrasted with rationalism, which emphasizes the role of reason and intuition in acquiring knowledge. In science, empiricism plays a central role in the scientific method, which involves making observations, formulating hypotheses, and testing those hypotheses through experimentation and observation. This approach has proven to be very effective in advancing our understanding of the natural world and has led to many important scientific discoveries. To reiterate, rationalism is a school of philosophic thought. A priori is the term for a type of reasoning that happens before or apart from sensory experience. Rationalism believes that reasoning is primarily a priori. Please note that the term is a priori, translation from what comes first, earlier, or previous, not simply priori. If you write priori alone, then you are simply saying first, the former, or earlier, which makes a significant difference in definition. And also, professional philosophers and Latin scholars will be uncertain about what you actually mean. Empiricism is a school of philosophic thought. A posteriori is the term for a type of reasoning that happens after or comes from sensory experience. Empiricism believes that reasoning is primarily a posteriori. Please note the term is a posteriori from the latter, not simply posteriori. If you write posteriori, then you are simply saying the latter rather than from the latter, which makes a difference in definition. And also, professional philosophers and Latin scholars will again be uncertain about what you actually mean. Descartes as the dualist. 4 rules of clear thinking. First of all, never accept anything as true for which there is any laudable possible doubt. Never make hasty assumptions. Divide the problem into as many parts as possible. Conduct thoughts in an orderly fashion, and fourth, explain findings as comprehensively as possible. Scientific method. Think with Socrates also calls it the hypothetical deductive method. Step 1. Scientists encounter a puzzling phenomena that needs an explanation. Step 2, scientists propose a hypothesis that would, if true, explain the phenomena. Step 3, scientists ask if the hypothesis is true, what facts about the world we can expect to observe or otherwise detect with our senses. And to answer this question, they derive observable or observational predictions from the hypothesis. Step 4, scientists test the hypothesis by observing the world to see if the phenomena predicted will be observed. Ideally, it should be possible for others to replicate the results. Step 5, finally, they accept, reject, or revise the hypothesis based on the test observations. Step 6, they communicate results of findings. Other scientists are then able to test for themselves and possibly further their own work. At this stage, after significant confirmation, the hypothesis may become theory. What is Cartesian skeptical argument? All right, the Cartesian skeptical argument is a philosophical argument that challenges our knowledge and beliefs about the external world. It is named after the philosopher René Descartes, who questioned whether he could trust his senses and knowledge of the world around him. He is the one that is famous for stating, "I think, therefore I am," suggesting that self-awareness is an assurance of existence and the one thing that we may indeed be certain of. The argument begins by proposing that we cannot be certain that our senses are reliable, therefore we cannot be sure that the world we perceive is actually the real world. For example, we might be dreaming, or we might have been deceived by an evil demon who is manipulating our senses. Descartes expressed this idea with his evil demon hypothesis, in which he suggested that an all-powerful deceiving demon could be manipulating our perceptions and making us believe in a false reality. This is very similar to the concept of reality suggested in the Matrix narrative. The Cartesian skeptical argument goes on to argue that if we cannot be certain that our senses are reliable, then we cannot be certain of anything about the external world. This includes our beliefs about the physical properties of objects, the laws of nature, and even the existence of other minds. Ultimately, the Cartesian skeptical argument challenges us to consider what we can truly know with certainty about the world around us and whether our beliefs and perceptions can be trusted. What is a Cartesian skeptical argument? Okay, so I think we actually just did this. Perhaps we've got, nope, but let's go forward. All right, here we go. A few more formal examples, perhaps. The dream argument. This argument suggests that we cannot be certain that we are currently dreaming and that our perceptions of the external world are not simply the products of our imaginings. If we cannot be sure that we are awake, then we cannot be sure that anything we experience in the external world is real. So this is the first kind of practical example. The evil demon hypothesis proposes that an all-powerful, deceiving demon could be manipulating our perceptions and making us to believe in a false reality. Now, if this were the case, then we could not trust anything we perceive, and all of our beliefs about the external world would be called into question. The brain in a vat argument. This Cartesian argument suggests that we might be brains in a vat, with all of our perceptions of the external world being fed to us by a computer or some other source. If this were the case, then we would have no way of verifying that the world we perceive is the real world, and all of our beliefs about the external world would be uncertain. Finally, the infinite regress argument. This argument suggests that any attempt to justify our beliefs about the external world will lead to an infinite regress of justifications, with each justification relying on a previous one. If we cannot find a foundation for our beliefs that does not rely on other beliefs, then we cannot be certain that anything is real in the external world. However, fortunately, just when we were thinking that there's nothing we could count on and no way we could know if what we think is real, we have countermeasures to Cartesian skepticism. So the first one we're going to look at as a countermeasure to Cartesian skepticism is called the common sense response. This response suggests that we should simply trust our common sense and everyday experiences of the world. Although we cannot be certain that our senses are always accurate, it is reasonable to assume that they are generally reliable and that the world we perceive is largely the real world. Also, what does it profit us to assume otherwise? Number two, the coherence response. This response suggests that we should evaluate our beliefs in terms of their coherence with other beliefs that we hold to be true. For example, we might argue that the belief that we currently are dreaming is incoherent with other beliefs we hold of the world, such as the belief that our actions have consequences. By evaluating our beliefs in this way, we can develop a more coherent picture of the world that we can be reasonably confident in. Number three, the pragmatic response. This response suggests that we should evaluate our beliefs in terms of their practical consequences. Even if we cannot be certain that our beliefs are true, we can still evaluate them based on how useful they are for achieving our goals and living our lives. In this way, we can rely on our beliefs even if we cannot be certain of their truth. Number four, the direct realism response. This response suggests that we should reject the idea that there's a gap between our perceptions and the external world. According to this view, our perceptions give us direct access to the external world, and we can be confident that the world we perceive is largely the real world. It's worth noting that these responses to the Cartesian skepticism are themselves subject to criticism and debate, and there is no one correct response to the problem of skepticism. Philosophers continue to grapple with these issues and develop new approaches to understanding our knowledge of the world. Biases and a perfect storm of confusion. Okay, so we had some confusion about biases. Quite a few individuals were confusing confirmation bias with selective attention bias and substitution bias with straw man argument. Confirmation bias is when one places more weight on beliefs that one is in agreement with consciously. Selective attention bias is a subconscious tendency to pay more attention to information that is in agreement with what one already believes. Substitution bias is an unintentional tendency to oversimplify when a question becomes too challenging by substituting a more easily answered question. Whereas strongman argument is a logical fallacy in which one intentionally substitutes one question or problem for another question or problem to intentionally misrepresent an opponent's argument in order to gain a tactical advantage in argumentation and debate. Intentionality and consciousness of what we are doing is key to understanding the difference between confirmation bias and selective attention bias, or substitution bias versus straw man argument. Let's move on to what is Aristotelian logic? A reminder. Aristotelian logic is also known as syllogistic logic or term logic, and it is a type of deductive reasoning developed by ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle in the 4th century BC. It is based on the idea that valid arguments can be deduced from premises that contain two terms and a middle term, where the conclusion follows logically from the relationship between the terms. Aristotelian logic uses categorical propositions, which are statements that relate to two classes or categories of things, such as all humans are mortal or some cats are black. These propositions are divided into four categories based on the quantity, universal or particular, and quality, affirmative or negative, of the statement. Aristotelian logic also uses a system of syllogisms, which are logical arguments that consist of three propositions, two premises, and a conclusion. There are four basic types of syllogism, each corresponding to one of the four categorical propositions. For example, the Barbara syllogism is a valid argument that goes as follows. All A are B, major premise. All C are A, minor premise. Therefore, all C are B, conclusion. Aristotelian logic was an important development in the history of philosophy and influenced the development of logic and reasoning in Western thought. However, it has limitations and is not always applicable to more complex arguments or reasoning in fields such as mathematics or computer science. Arguments. What is a syllogism? Let's go further into understanding what a syllogism is. A syllogism is a logical argument that consists of three propositions, two premises, and a conclusion. The premises are statements that are assumed to be true, and the conclusion is a statement that logically follows from the premises. The goal of a syllogism is to demonstrate that the conclusion is necessarily true if the premises are true. Syllogisms are typically structured in the form all A are B, all C are A, therefore all C are B. This is known as the standard form of categorical syllogism, where A, B, and C are categories of things or concepts. The first two statements are the premises, and the third statement is the conclusion. For example, a simple syllogism would be premise 1, all mammals are warm-blooded animals. Premise 2, all dogs are mammals. Conclusion, therefore, all dogs are warm-blooded animals. Let's say that again. Conclusion, therefore, all dogs are warm-blooded animals. This syllogism follows the standard form, and the conclusion logically follows from the premises. Syllogisms can be used to reason about various topics, including philosophy, law, and science. It is worth noting that while syllogisms can be useful for demonstrating logical relationships between concepts and drawing conclusions from them, they have limitations. Syllogisms rely on the assumptions of the premises being true and do not necessarily take into account more complex reasoning or real-world situations where premises may not be entirely accurate. General review of argument types discussed. Arguments are basically deductive or inductive in the sense that one is either certain or not completely certain of the conclusion. We have looked at abductive reasoning too, hazarding to the best guess. Deductive arguments have a certain conclusion. Inductive arguments have a likely but not entirely certain conclusion. Abductive reasoning makes a conclusion based upon previous and immediately relevant information. There are two basic parts to any argument. There is a premise or premises and evidence. Then there is the conclusion or result. There are certain phrases that indicate a premise, such as if, because, given, that, since, for. There are certain words or phrases that indicate a conclusion, such as then, thus, therefore, and, of course, in conclusion. The most basic causal relationship argument structure is known as the if-then argument. Valid, strong, and sound. Valid means that the conclusion follows logically from the premises. Evidence is related to and supports the conclusion. Strong means that the conclusion is likely or based upon the premises as evidence in a very highly likely context. Sound means that there is a clear relationship between the argument and what we believe to be true, that the argument is in keeping with consensus-driven beliefs about reality. Things to look for in an argument or claim: internal consistency, external consistency, testability, explanatory scope, simplicity, fruitfulness, conservatism, and explanatory power. These concepts are discussed in previous and subsequent videos in this series. Thank you. We are headed into somewhat new territory to deepen our understanding of how the structure of arguments and communication function during the second portion of the term. If you have any questions or concerns about the course hereto, please let me know. Many thanks.